Condition Sheets and Case Studies by Kay Butler from Franklin County Career and Technology Center. We're going to have to hold questions until later on because the other presentation has to start at exactly 9 o'clock.
While you're finishing your evaluation for the last presentation, I'll just go ahead and get started. My name is Faye Gaudler, and I'm from the Franklin County Career and Technology Center, Practical Nursing Program in Chambersburg. And it's a privilege to be here. I've been here a number of times and have benefited from other presentations, and I wanted to share something that I've done. I've been teaching with the program for 26 years, and about 15 years ago, I recognized that, as we all know, the more we involve students actively in doing their own work rather than just lecturing, the more they get from it. And so the old Chinese proverb, tell me and I will forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I will understand, certainly is something that you are well aware of. And the original challenge that I faced, and I know that you all faced, is that clinical experiences don't consistently provide each student with exposure to all of the common conditions that they may face in their nursing career. And so the common medical surgical conditions and the need to know information about that condition related to the nursing care that's involved is something that you can't guarantee that every student is going to see a burn patient, for instance, or whatever the condition is. And we're all aware with the emphasis on critical thinking and clinical judgment and so forth, that they have to know this information in order to make those decisions, in order to have a good understanding of the nursing process that they need to put into practice. And so about 15 years ago, I developed, and in your handout you have the template for the condition sheets. I developed these condition sheets that I've been using for at least 15 years. I don't really remember exactly when I started using them, but the condition sheets allow the student to research and get the information about the pathophysiology, the medical care, the nursing care, and so forth that's needed. And they sometimes did them prior to the lecture if they had a patient with a particular medical condition whenever they were going to clinical and level 1. They would do their condition sheet. Other times they would do them in correspondence with their lesson in theory class. But the research and the completion of the condition sheet, if it was the theory class, was part of the lecture, but if it was in preparation for clinical, it was completely their own initiative to fill out their condition sheets. The research certainly improved their knowledge and their ability to understand the dependent nursing interventions that came from the medical aspects, the independent nursing interventions that they needed to know to do on their own for a particular condition. The addition at the bottom of the nursing diagnoses helped to prepare them for the detailed care plans that we had them do. I started them thinking in the NANDA terminology for nursing diagnoses and so forth. The condition sheets were used successfully for more than 10 years, independent of the next thing that I did. And I think it's the last handout that you have. I have one of the critical thinking activities that I developed. And the critical thinking activities were added to try to create more active involvement with the student in the clinical setting. The data where they were able to collect from the electronic electronic medical record. As they were in the clinical sites, they had patients that they could pull up their records and look for the particular information. I have a notebook that I have the condition sheets for all of the conditions that I have listed there. And then I also have the critical thinking topics in another notebook that you're certainly welcome to look at any of the material that I have in more detail. But I have a critical thinking activity on coronary artery disease that focuses on anticoagulant therapy, monitoring with the ProTime INRs, the emphasis on dietary issues with the vitamin K and so forth. The congestive heart failure critical thinking activity focuses on some of the dietary restrictions and the monitoring of weights and so forth. I did one on chronic renal failure. In addition, there's one on intravenous therapy, on professional conduct, on diabetes, and on pressure ulcers. I think I included a pressure ulcer in your packet. The students, with the assistance of the instructor, if they needed to have assistance finding patients that had the particular disease condition, the instructor would help them to find the electronic medical record to get the information, and there were application questions, as you can see there, for the critical thinking activities. That was the second component of my development of these condition sheets, and then we came to Hurricane Sandy back in October of 2012, and we had to have clinical makeup for a day that we were closed, and one of my coworkers suggested using a case study, and of course, being a bit antiquated, stick in the mud, type of thing, I wasn't real excited about case studies because I had looked at the case study books that we had in the library, and they were really not something that I felt was on the level that my students were at. And so as I agreed reluctantly, as my boss will tell you, to go ahead with this case study idea and so on, I realized that case studies really were a good idea. It's just that the available published ones were not in line with what I felt was important for my students to know. And so a new challenge that I faced was, if the published case studies were written at a level beyond what I really felt was necessary for my practical nurse students, was there something that I could develop that would be more applicable to the student population that I was working with? And so, looking back, certainly the use of philosophies and what's out there in the literature and so forth emphasizes the importance of active learning, and case studies, like clinical, create an active learning environment. And so as I looked at the literature and so forth, the experiential learning is a philosophy and methodology in which the educator purposely engages the students in direct experience and focused reflection in order to increase their knowledge, develop skills, and clarify values. And this is what we all are doing as we try to actively involve students in one way or another. And the maxim from way back in 1938, there's an intimate and necessary relationship between the process of actual experience and education. The more actual experience that we can create, the more the student is going to learn. And so what I did was created case studies from my own experience and from basic knowledge that I knew my students needed. And as a matter of fact, the one case study that I put in my packet, just to show you the application of personal experience that you can use, is my husband's experience a few years ago whenever he traveled to New York State and had BPH and ended up coming home with an indwelling catheter and so forth. The other one I think that I included is on Parkinson's disease, a friend of mine from church. It's basically his life story. And so you can come up with these case study creations very easily if you simply think about your own experiences as a nurse and or as a family friend type of situation. But I developed these case studies, and the 3-ring binder that I provided for the students, you have the initial listing of what they kept in their portfolio notebook, and they included the condition sheets and the case studies and the critical thinking activities, along with some other objectives that we did for speakers and so forth. And so the student had this portfolio of medical surgical active participation that they had kept during the year. The implementation involved group collaboration, and the result was genuine and guided conversations that provided the active learning. What I did was try to create that spirit of inquiry that we are hearing so much about from NLN, and get the students active in their own learning and help to develop the interest in continuing their lifelong learning experience. The student's role was to actively share the information with their peers, and as a matter of fact, what I did was the students would break up into groups depending on how many case studies for a lesson I had. I would just have them number off, and they would get into groups, and they would answer the questions, discuss the scenario, and then they would get back together, and their group would get in front of the class, and they would teach the information to their classmates that they had discussed in their small group. And so they ended up practicing teaching strategies. I allowed them to ask the class questions. They could do whatever type of interaction with the class that they wanted to do, and it was in the non-threatening environment of their peers that they got to teach. The first time that I had them stand in front of the class and do that teaching, they weren't happy with it, but they realized after they did it a few times that it was very beneficial to have that presentation type of thing. And so experiential education is an evidence-based strategy that's been implemented through the use of these condition sheets, the critical thinking activities, and the case studies. There's no cost beyond the time that it's spent developing the activities, and the implementation was very easy. The success, the students have certainly expressed that they have learned a lot from the active participation in the particularly critical thinking activities and the case studies. As I say, the condition sheets I've been doing for so long that I don't remember whether they liked them in the beginning or not, but it's only been within the last 5 years that I've been doing the critical thinking activities. Once the hospital went to the electronic medical record, it was much easier to get the data from the computer compared to a hard copy chart, and so those critical activities I've not been doing as long as the condition sheets, and as I say, it's only been the last year and a half that I've been using the case studies, but I have found that they've been very helpful in getting that active involvement that assures that the student learns through doing. As we focus on in clinical, we all know that clinical sites are becoming a problem, certainly with the short length of stay that patients are in the hospital, the number of things that are being treated as outpatients or being shipped to medical centers and so forth. Some topic areas are not easy to get in the active clinical setting. And so reference-wise, there's a number of things out there on experiential learning and on the use of case studies. And so you're more than welcome to look at the case studies and or critical thinking activities that I have. Are there any questions about my implementation or about the development of any of these activities?
We're going to hold the questions until
Okay.
later. Okay, so our last presentation is yes,